Welcome to Making Democracy Work, a monthly program brought to you by the League of Women Voters of Honolulu. Each month we talk about matters of community interest, and today we are going to talk about climate change. And we have as our guests Stuart Scott of
Scientists Warning.
Scientists Warning, and Dan Galpern. Tell me again.
Sure. Of Climate Protection and Restoration Initiative.
All right. And my co-host, Kaui Lucas, thank you for coming. So who is going to start off? Stuart.
I was going to start with a few slides that were I used in Madrid at the recently completed Conference of Parties, the COP25, otherwise known as the UN climate negotiations, which were notably unsuccessful this year. So if we can get the first slide, I'll explain the perspective that I've had over the years. So I've been looking at this problem for quite a while, and it amazes me how national leaders have ignored the severity of the climate problem. And they have this ritual annual process of kicking the can down the road, where they supposedly get together to negotiate an end to the fossil fuel era, but that doesn't happen. And why doesn't it happen? And this slide kind of says it in a nutshell, because you've got a huge interference from moneyed interests. Can you keep the slides coming? Okay, so the short answer is, why is the climate not being given its proper attention, is because the economic system we have, and I don't often use the word capitalism because it's so loaded. It's considered to be a political system when in fact it's an economic system. So it's got, Chinese communist government, but they have a capitalist system. So capitalism is what's doing it. Capitalism is designed to expand exponentially, and that's not possible in a finite world. Next slide, please. And the hope to make capitalism sustainable is the most misleading and illusory concept in today's political, social, and economic thought. Sustainable capitalism is an oxymoron. You can tweak it, you can imagine it, but it's never going to be sustainable because capitalism has to expand. It's the nature. Next slide. This is Yvo de Boer, who is the head of the climate negotiations until the end of 2015. When we had the talks in Paris and made that famous Paris Agreement, which was part of the game. And Yvo de Boer said that year that the only way that a 2015 agreement can achieve its stated 2-degree goal is to shut down the global economy. That is, to keep the Earth within 2 degrees centigrade of its historical mean temperature. We'd have to shut down the economy. Now, that's an inaccurate statement, but it's closer than most people get. We have to radically change the economy. How? That's a whole separate subject. Next. Okay, so what happened after that COP, that meeting in 2015, was basically it fell apart. There was a failure that year. Now, as you approached that year's talks, these were the signs in the subway. That one with Angela Merkel, the next one with Barack Obama, and it was basically world leaders. They had a series of them along the wall coming out of the subway, apologizing that we could have fixed the problem back in 2009, but we didn't. And here it is, 2020, the year they were looking ahead to, when we were supposed to have gotten off fossil fuels by now, or at least largely gotten off fossil fuels. No such thing has happened. Next slide. So in every year since the Paris Agreement was made, the funding, the bank funding of fossil fuel extraction has increased over $600 billion each year, and the total, next slide, got very close to $2 trillion. That is, new money has gone into exploring for fossil fuels and developing fossil fuels, and the worst kinds, the tar sands. This is a travesty, when in fact nations should be anchoring down, not anchoring up, their fossil fuel consumption.
So, Stuart, with you in Madrid was Dan.
Yes.
And you guys shared the stage a couple of times, and I just want to get a check-in from Dan about what your takeaway was at Madrid.
Well, first of all, I agree that the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change process has not borne sufficient fruit. So far, it's a failure. I agree that COP25, which was the conference in Madrid early last month, did not provide the level of success that is necessary for us to have more than the glimmer of hope that we can survive this crisis. We agree that we are in a terrible crisis. But I don't agree that we have to first dissolve capitalism. We don't have time. Time is too short. I do believe that we need significant changes. Climate change is a classic and extreme market failure, but there are ways, even within the capitalist system, of accounting for that and adjusting prices so that one can handle pollution problems, problems of externalities, such as this. We have not done that yet. We haven't even begun to act with the tools that are available even with the capitalist system. So I believe that we need to make our existing system work. We need different leadership, especially in the United States, but not only in the United States, in Brazil, Australia, in Russia. We need substantial action that is possible even within the UNFCCC system.
So what are the things that you've been concentrating on? First off, I just want to say, we're lucky to have you here. You happen to be in town for a family wedding. You actually live in Oregon,
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
And I don't think it was mentioned yet that you're an attorney.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so that you're coming at it from, how do we sue the sons of guns?
Yeah, I mean, we need major policy changes, and I believe as an impetus, we need to be able to sue the major fossil fuel producing corporations, oil, gas, and coal, so as to blunt their power, take them down a few notches, but also, in particular, to compel them to pay to restore a viable climate system. And there are a number of lawsuits to date seeking to force the fossil fuel companies to pay for seawalls or other necessary infrastructure fortification in the event of continued climate change and continued rise of the seas. That's important, and a finding of liability against those companies would be very significant. But we need to do more, and perhaps would provide some incentive for them. But in order to provide a serious incentive to them to phase out fossil fuel emissions, and also to be able to restore a viable climate system, we need to do more than simply phase out all fossil fuel emissions, but we also have to draw down excess atmospheric CO2. That is costly. The question is, who should bear the brunt of that cost? Should it be citizens who are already suffering from the ravages of climate change? Same is true of highly vulnerable nations. Or should the cost at least be shared by those who have profited most from their ability to utilize our common atmosphere as an open sewer for their waste products? I think that they should be required to share in that burden.
Do we see any glimmers of hope on that horizon?
Well, there are a number of lawsuits that are currently underway, including in the United States, including Maui County and Honolulu County have recently announced that they will be suing the carbon majors. And for conventional damages for fortification of infrastructure and that sort of thing. I've been staying near the North Shore. To get there, you have to drive on Highway 83 along the coast. And it is very close to sea level.
Kamehameha Highway.
Yes, that's right.
Actually, half of it is gone.
That's right. That's right. I mean, and that's expensive. An estimate from the year 2017, including by Chip Fletcher here at the University of Hawaii and a number of others, indicates that Hawaii will need to spend north of $17 billion to pay for necessary
Billion with a
repairs.
B.
With a B. Billion with a B. Who should pay that? Well, Honolulu County, Maui County have stood up and said, we should not pay that full cost. It should be borne, in particular, by those who have profited, as I said, from their ability to freely emit, from their ability to market their product, whose intended purpose is burning, which of necessity causes the emissions that cause the sea to rise. So that is very promising. Some of those cases are already underway. The city of Baltimore, the state of Rhode Island, a number of jurisdictions in California, the city and county of Boulder, Colorado. And we will learn probably in this new year whether those cases will be allowed to proceed in state court. It's a technical detail, but it's better that they are most properly brought in state court. It's better that they be addressed under state law, because these are common law public nuisances that are being created. But I should also say, part of these cases, derives from the fact that these are not just innocent producers of a product that we all want to use. They have bent our political system to ensure against any meaningful restrictions of them. Stuart talked about how they've bent the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change process, but they've also bent our political system in the United States through their deception, through their advertising, through their manipulation of the truth, through funding of school textbooks that essentially define away the problem of climate change. They bear culpability above and beyond their mere production of a product that we all use.
What companies are being sued?
Well, I don't know who is going to be sued here, because the complaint hasn't been filed yet. But if it's similar to some of these other cases, you're talking about the major oil, gas, and coal companies. So Exxon, Shell, ConocoPhillips, BP, Chevron. That's right. And they, in my view, and in the view of many legal scholars and scientists, bear a heavy measure of responsibility for the present crisis and the damages that are being inflicted upon communities from Hawaii to Providence, Rhode Island.
And they knew it would happen. Their internal memos indicated that their scientists.
That's right. They knew. Exxon knew. The National Association of Manufacturers knew. The various associations knew, and that were lobbying against restrictions. They were also quite aware from their own scientists that this was a significant danger, and in fact, some of them were raising the altitude of their oil rigs. Why? Because they wanted to ensure that they would be able to continue to function, even in the era of rising sea levels
They were
caused by
learning.
climate change.
They learned this from the tobacco companies, right? Cast doubt
Yep.
on the cause of climate change.
That's right. Our product is doubt.
There's a very good documentary, Merchants of Doubt, that shows how the fossil fuel companies basically tore a page out of the playbook from not just the tobacco companies, but it was the same firm, the same advertising firm that did it for the when they were trying to overrule the wisdom of the firefighters and legalize toxic fireproofing chemicals.
Right, yes.
This company, this marketing company, cast doubt on the science and against the health interests of the very people who are going to use it, the firefighters. They got these chemicals approved.
And let me say, litigation finally was brought against the tobacco companies, and some of it was successful, in part. But tobacco is still being widely used around the world and here in the United States, including by many minors.
And proliferating into new products like e-cigarettes.
This is right. With respect to preserving the climate system, we need not merely to knock them down a few notches. We need to ensure that fossil fuel emissions, and so the use of fossil fuels for all but a handful of uses, need to be phased out. And they need to be phased out within decades. So it's not sufficient to have, it's important to have a finding of liability by one or several jurisdictions or courts that these jurisdictions are bringing the cases to.
That can take decades, though.
No, I think that these cases probably will be decided in the next few years.
Which case
except for the appeals
has advanced the furthest?
Well, several of them are before the appellate courts right now.
I see.
The ones in California before the Ninth Circuit. The New York case is before the Second Circuit. The Baltimore case is before the Fourth Circuit, Federal Court of Appeals. The Colorado case is before the Court of Appeals that in the 10th Circuit that covers Colorado. And the central issue there is whether these cases should be decided under federal law or under state law. The oil, gas, and coal companies are trying to ensure that it's decided under federal law because there was a terrible decision by the U.S. Supreme Court, an 8-0 decision in 2011 called AEP versus Connecticut, which said that there's no federal law of public nuisance, no federal common law to deal with, that's available to deal with climate change. One of the worst environmental decisions in the history of our country. But they said this does not mean that type of claim cannot be brought in state court. So that's the reason why these cases are being brought in state court, or in the one case where it's being brought in federal court, they're trying to apply state law there. I believe it should. These cases should be decided under state court.
Won't they eventually get to federal, though?
No. This is the battle right now. I nearly said tobacco companies. The fossil fuel companies removed those cases. It's automatic if you seek to remove it. They removed those cases from state to federal court. And now the battle is over the plaintiffs, the jurisdiction's motions to remand to state court. So City and County of San Francisco and Oakland in their case, and counties of Marin and Contra Costa County and Imperial Beach and Santa Cruz, they have asked the Ninth Circuit to remand the case, send it back to state court, and so that it can be decided properly under state law, where the claim of public nuisance still survives.
So when might we know how that goes?
Sometime this coming year. Sometime this year.
This year, okay.
Yeah, there are oral arguments in all of these cases. For example, the one in the Ninth Circuit is happening next month. Now, just because the argument happens next month doesn't mean that it will be actually decided next month. It could be a number of months after that, perhaps even a year. But I believe that most of these key jurisdictional issues should be decided in 2020, maybe 2021.
So, Stuart, looking at Hawaii, on the ground here, okay, we're filing, Honolulu's filing a lawsuit and Maui's filing a lawsuit. What else do you think are the most bang for your buck actions that we can take?
Oh my goodness. Wow.
Okay, well.
I have several too
big question.
when you're done, because I have several off the top of my head because I.
Oh well, throw yours in.
Yeah,
on the
go
top.
ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
And maybe
that's fine.
maybe you'll agree with some of this. One of the central policy changes that could be made at the state level is to enact a carbon fee and dividend program. So this would be to place an honest price on emissions of fossil fuels. But to avoid the problem that has infected France, for example, where they increased fuel prices there and led to major protests, you want to ensure that the average person is made whole, okay? Because the idea is to impose this on those who use the most fossil fuels, and it turns out that those are the richest people among us. So if you dividend all of the fees that are collected to people on a per capita basis, it's actually a progressive way of, it's a progressive tax. So a fee and dividend approach, I think, is the way to go. It would have the effect of increasing energy costs, but people would see at least the same amount on an average basis returned to them in a yearly check.
So what if the states were to reduce the tax rates on like the gas tax, and
Right.
instead of subsidizing the fuel companies, subsidize the carbon?
Well, we need to eliminate the the tax incentives, the tax breaks for the fossil fuel companies. So that's very important. But beyond that, we need to impose an across-the-board fee on carbon-based fuels and rebate those dollars to people on a per capita basis. That would raise the cost of energy, fossil fuel-based energy, make renewables and other non-fossil fuel-based sources of energy competitive, in fact advantageous, and also enable people to afford to switch to electric cars or to switch to higher use of renewable energy, because it will in fact be more affordable and we'll have more money in our pockets from the annual dividend check, similar to what happens in the state of Alaska. And it's highly popular.
There's an organization called the Citizens Climate Lobby.
Yes.
That's active both nationally and internationally now, and is active here in Hawaii. There's a chapter, a branch that meets here in Honolulu.
And they were leading the charge for divestment a couple of years ago. Divesting.
Probably the same cast of characters, but 350.org was leading the charge for divestment. I had some of my work going in that direction also. I went to Norway to try to get the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund to divest the largest pot of money, retirement money in the world, or one of them. And they actually have announced divestment. But Citizens Climate Lobby, their approach was fee and dividend. That is, you put a fee on the carbon content of the fuel, essentially what's going to be in the atmosphere after it's burned. And that fee is paid at the point of importation, if it's the state, or the wellhead, if it's a nation that's pumping. And so that fee is paid, and then it goes into a fund that is divided up per capita. So it turns out to be a progressive tax, where people who spend very little on fossil fuels will get back more. So it's one of the things that I also think that we should be pushing. But
Has legislation been drafted for that?
Yes, legislation is drafted, and a number of legislators are considering it this year. So
And it's going to be introduced in Hawaii?
it's being considered for introduction in Hawaii. It's a question of the choices that your legislative leaders are going to be making over the next few weeks.
Good. Yeah.
Something we can follow up on.
Yes.
I tend to not focus on the legal remedies. I tend to focus more in the area of social domain, and I am very much in support of the Fridays for Future, which is the global except for the United States because of the clampdown by the Trump administration on any mention of climate change. But there are every Friday, students, several million students, I forget what the count is up to, stay out of school. Fridays for Future. And that was started by the now famous Greta Thunberg. I support that wholeheartedly, and it's not only kids who are going to these demonstrations. There are grandparents for future, and we're getting active in scientists for future. Civil disobedience, the Extinction Rebellion, I support the idea. Here I need an attorney to watch out what I say so I don't get sued for
Well, you're in the
support.
company of Martin Luther King, so
Yeah,
I think you're
okay.
fine to speak out about that.
Yeah.
And Stuart, I see that we have very little time left before our time to go. And you brought a wonderful short video that I
Yes.
think
If
it
you
would be
can-
wonderful. It would be great to leave on. Thank you both for coming down to Olelo
Can you skip over the 2 slides and go to the video, the image of the woman speaking?
Yes.
There we go. Start.
Dear young people,
Don't vote.
Don't vote.
Everything's fine the way it is.
Trump. That was us.
He's our guy.
Tax cuts for the rich? Hell yeah. I'm rich as fuck.
Climate change? That's a you problem. I'll be dead soon.
sure, school shootings are sad.
But I haven't been in a school for 50 years.
I can't keep track of which lives matter.
Sure you don't like it.
So, you'll like some meme on Instagram.
If the weather is nice, maybe you could go to one of those little marches.
You might even share this video on Facebook.
But you won't vote.
You young people never do.
But I do.
I do.
I do.
Midterms, primaries.
Every single election.
We'll be there, but you won't.
Because we're a generation of doers.
Not whiners.
And we're doing great.